The other two letters, the letter of April 26, 95 was written to Lieutenant C. Coffin, Indiana State Police. It too was signed off on by Anders Greenwood, 102 August Street, Hamden, Connecticut.
I noticed that's a different address than the Parsable Place.
Yeah, right. We're going to get back to that.
Okay.
Fourth letter was April 26, 95. It was written to Lieutenant Joe Enlow, Sacramento PD. That letter was signed off by Anders C. Greenwood, phone number, and an email address. Anyway, the FBI Unabomber Task Force approved it, and Lieutenant Enlow of the SAC PD gave me copies of these letters because the FBI wanted to see if I could determine if there was anything that they might have missed, either within the phone numbers or the addresses. I also determined that there was the only other difference that it really jumped off the page at me was the address for 9517 Parsable Place, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87111 with a phone number. Okay, now why this specifically jumped off the page at me was that, if you recall, I had projected and predicted that his very next bomb would be in June, July of 95. Okay, so I was specifically looking for anything around the end of June or the beginning of July of 1995. And the more I looked at it, all of a sudden it jumped off the page. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but 9517, if you look in reverse, is 7195. That's what I picked off of it. Parsable, if you break that down, it's Paris, French Airlines, or could be Paris, French Airlines. I was determining that that's what it was saying. Place, to me, meant the bomb was going to be placed on a French Airlines going to Paris, France. I had already projected that the next bomb would be on the west coast, to the west coast, and there had already been a lot of speculation that it was going to be to a West Coast airline. That on the West Coast, any major airlines going out of California to France, maybe direct, would be out of LAX International. So this was on the 1st of May, after we had had our meeting in 95, after we had had our meeting at the library. Mm-hmm. And so I notified, because of this information, I obviously notified Joel Moss and Jim Freeman of the San Francisco FBI Unabomber Task Force. They were both the ones that were supposed to be heading it up. I was working directly with them and basically no other members of the task force. So they were the only ones at all that knew that I was involved with this at all. Anyway, I advised them of what I had discovered, and then I let them both know that I was going to contact the FAA Director of Security at LAX, who was a personal friend of mine, Danny Martino, who was an ex-FPS agent for Boston, and him and I worked a lot of the Cuban refugee camps together and worked together for over a year before I transferred to California. In any event, I telephoned Danny and I faxed him the information and let him know what I thought and what I felt was going on, and that I advised San Francisco task force people, Unabomber task force people at FBI. He agreed with my findings. He looked it over. He called me back a few hours later. He says, "I agree with all your findings. I'm putting LAX on alert," and he did. And that was on the 1st of May, 95, and as everybody might remember from history, eventually all the airlines in the United States were put on alert because of the extent that this bomber goes to, and he could basically bomb anywhere, anytime, and he had already shown that he could bomb airlines. with specifically Flight 444 back in the beginning. So that was the result of my involvement basically with Sacramento PD. They're getting the approval to give me these letters. With them doing that, we got that information to the FBI and LAX, and that was basically taken care of. And from there, the very next thing that happened was that I had determined, after going over all my chartings and everything else again, that no, he wasn't going to bomb an airlines. It was just a ruse. And in between my determining that it was a ruse, the Unabomber had sent letters to the San Francisco Chronicle and others that he was intending on bombing a West Coast Airlines soon, and that was in I think it was mid-June or something like that that letter went out. And then I sent the task force the letter that no, it's a ruse, and then within 2 weeks the Unabomber come up and sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle and others stating that no, he wasn't planning on bombing a West Coast Airlines. It was just a ruse.
So basically what you're saying is that you were getting into this person's head a little bit. You're one step ahead of him at times, right?
Exactly.
You've compiled a lot of information. Now, when you conveyed this to law enforcement, talking the FBI mainly, do you believe that maybe they looked at you with all this knowledge and say, this guy has too much knowledge, he knows too much? What's the deal? Did they ever openly question you regarding your possible involvement?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah. Before I get to that, let me back up just a minute.
Okay.
Okay. So just to go over just a couple of things. My first prediction, I predicted the Unabomber's next bomb would be to the West Coast sometime in late June or July, early July. Okay. My okay. In early May, I predicted that he was going to bomb a West Coast Airlines on 7/1/95. Then in late May, I predicted the Unabomber was not going to bomb a West Coast Airlines, and this was a joke. Those are the things we just were talking about.
Right.
Okay. And then in late May 95, I also predicted the Unabomber, instead of bombing a West Coast Airlines on 7/1/95, he was going to send a package bomb to UOC Berkeley in California in the early morning mail. And then it happened. On July 1st, 95, in the early morning mail, Professor Tom Tyler received a package from the Unabomber in the early morning mail, and thank God for Professor Tyler and everybody else involved, it wasn't a bomb, but it was from the Unabomber. It happened to be a copy of his manifest. Okay, now the other part of this that nobody knows about is that for 2 weeks prior to July 1st, 95, I had been in contact with UC Berkeley PD, San Francisco FBI Task Force, bomb squads, demolition squads, detectives, I mean, you name it, everybody. Everybody knew, SWAT teams, everybody knew about the 7/1/95 incident at Berkeley. Everybody was on alert. The package still got through. Don't ask me how, the package still got, well, it wasn't a bomb, so.
Just a manifesto.
It was just a manifesto. So anyway, the package got through, okay? It was in the early morning mail. In answer to John's question, at 9 o'clock that very same morning, I had 2 FBI agents out of the Sacramento field office come to my home to interrogate me, and it lasted for about 2 hours to determine whether I was the Unabomber, because I was the only one that knew this was going to happen, and it happened. Only the Unabomber would know, and I happened to know. And I happened to know, so I had to be the Unabomber. Anyway, as it turned out, I identified myself as a federal agent that had been on disability, and I had been working with the task force, the head of the task force, Freeman and Russ, and they made contact with them down in San Francisco, and that was all cleared away. And they left 2 hours later happy, and everybody shook hands, and everybody went their own way.
How did you, Dick, you a lot of extensive research and planning and placing on diagram, all this. How did you come up with a profile? Did you come up with a profile on this individual?
I did. I came up with a 17-page profile that turned out to be about 85.5% accurate after we arrested him.
In your investigative process over the years with this case, were there any law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, were they actively doing what you were doing, putting in the time to, did they have people that worked in cryptography and analyzing documents?
The answer to the question is absolutely no. As far as what I was told by the head of the San Francisco task force was that they had people looking at it completely linguistically. They had absolutely no one looking at it mathematically. And even though I told him probably once or twice that I recall, and him as Jim Freeman or Joel Ross, heads of the San Francisco task force, and it has to be understood that I was receiving calls from either one or the other once to twice a week during over a period of a year until he was caught. They would call me for updates continuously, where I was at, do I have anything new for them? After the professor at UC Berkeley received his manifest, he had mentioned that if his manifest was allowed to be published, that he would discontinue his bombings. And so, there was a lot of discussion going back and forth in Washington. And, so that was on July 1st when he got the manifest. In August or September of 95, the decision was made out of Washington, D.C. U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno had decided and opted to go with his request, and they allowed the manifest to be published. And at that point in time, it was published just almost worldwide, as far as I know, in all kinds of magazines and newspapers. Within August or September of 95, the FBI authorized Sac PD to release a copy of the manifest to me. I received a copy of the original, and I read it and reread it and reread it, and I had completely determined that this guy was no fluke. This guy was very well educated and all of that. And in November of 1995, I predicted that he was going to continue bombing. And he had specifically stated that if they published his manifesto, he would discontinue bombing. Okay, so in November 95, I predicted he was going to continue bombing. And I predicted that he was going to bomb 2 more times in June or July of 1996, from my best recollection. Okay, so that was my 5th prediction. That no, he wasn't going to stop bombing. He was going to continue bombing, and he was going to bomb 2 more times in 1996. I predicted this in November 1995. Okay, it should be noted, on 4/3/1996, when the Unabomber was arrested in his cabin in Montana, there were 2 bombs in the cabin, one complete and ready to be mailed, packaged and ready to be mailed, and a second completely made and packaged. In a box, but not packaged and ready to be mailed yet. So, no matter what they say, he was going to continue to bomb, and there were 2 bombs in his cabin he intended on doing something with.